You've all seen how people transform into werewolves. The hair that sprouts out all over their body, the hands and feet turning into killer claws, the snout protruding out painfully, and the fangs descending ready to draw blood. But what turns a person into a werewolf? Is it the full moon? Something they ate? A terrible curse perhaps? Well, why don't we find out? In this film you're going to discover the origins of the werewolf myth, how women have often been werewolves because this is an equal opportunities monster, the terrifying ancient legends that inspired a century of Hollywood movies, and why does London, my home city, feature so often in werewolf stories. I want to start with the movies to see how werewolves have been depicted on screen, and then go back to those ancient legends to see if Hollywood and Netflix have got it right. Let's begin with my favourite werewolf movie of all time. It has to be An American Werewolf in London, directed by John Landis and released in 1981. That movie did two things. It set the benchmark for werewolf transformations, and it was also based in my home city of London. What is it about this city? Because there is something about London and werewolves, but I'll come to that in a minute. An American Werewolf in London mixed the genre of horror with goofball comedy in a way that many people at the time just didn't like. The werewolf transformation scene that sees American backpacker David Kessler transform into a wolf was absolutely incredible to see in the cinema 40 years ago. It's hardly surprising that 2 years after American Werewolf in London came out, Michael Jackson asked John Landis to direct his iconic video for the song Thriller. 1981 was something of a bumper year for werewolves because we also had The Howling, but I think American Werewolf in London has aged way better than that movie. Do remember to subscribe if you want more horrific content like this. You really don't want to miss out. When I say that director John Landis set the benchmark for werewolf transformations, this isn't hyperbole, I'm not exaggerating. I don't think he was equaled for a long time. Werewolf transformations have come in many shapes and sizes down the years. This one, for example, during ballet practice. This was Howling 3 in 1987, where a dancer transforms into a wolf while pirouetting, a performance of Swan Lake you're unlikely to forget in a hurry. Back in the early 1930s, the talkies had barely got going when Hollywood launched itself into what's now regarded as the golden age of the horror movie. More specifically, Universal Studios had found a big cash cow with the word horror branded on it. The Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi defined the on-screen persona of Dracula in 1931, and Boris Karloff, an English actor, did more or less the same thing with Frankenstein. The first Universal Studios outing with a werewolf in it was Werewolf of London in 1935. As I said, London features time and time again in the werewolf genre. In the movie, an English botanist goes to Tibet to conduct research, gets bitten by a werewolf, comes back to London and starts to transform. Won't spoil the movie entirely for you, but when he dies, we get that classic reversion from wolf back to dead human. It's really the Wolfman in 1941 that fully establishes the werewolf in the pantheon of Hollywood monsters. Although in that transformation scene it really does look like a tube of Imac could have solved that hair growth problem. A couple of years later, and Hollywood gave theatre goers two bangs for their buck with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And in this there is a fight scene between the two monsters that today is less than thrilling, but I think at the time would have had theatre goers on the edge of their seats and well and truly distracted from the Second World War, which was raging outside. House of Frankenstein in 1944 saw a deranged scientist recruiting Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman to do his evil bidding. Following years saw the Wolfman and Dracula both begging a scientist to cure them of their condition in House of Dracula. You're probably guessing now what happened next, that Universal Studios, by the end of the 1940s, had well and truly flogged their horror characters to death. And even Dracula was going to have difficulty clawing his way out of that grave for a while. In the 1930s, the werewolf was played by top horror actors like Bela Lugosi, who was more famous for Dracula, and also Lon Chaney Jr. Their names became synonymous with horror. You knew when you saw Bela Lugosi or Lon Chaney Jr. on a theatre poster, you were going to get a rollicking good horror movie. But in my view, there was one actor who was absolutely cut out to play a werewolf. Step forward, Oliver Reed. He appears in Hammer Horror's The Curse of the Werewolf in 1961. In real life, Oliver Reed was somebody who could change from charming to odious through the transformative power of alcohol. So there was something about this monster that really suited Oliver Reed's character, suave and sophisticated one moment and a brawling brute the next. Now, I have to admit that I was completely unaware of something called Werewolf Erotica, and these are books where the main character is a sexually highly charged werewolf. On the Goodreads app, where authors and writers can chat to each other, I found about 500 examples of werewolf erotica. They had alluring titles like Tempting the Beast and A Hunger Like No Other. The film industry has long latched on to this aspect of werewolves. Male werewolves, with their out-of-control violence and slavering libidos, were soon recognised by Hollywood as a kind of metaphor for randy teenage males in post-Second World War America. So in 1957 we get the movie I Was a Teenage Werewolf that kind of taps into that James Dean type angst, only taking it to the next level. The main character, troubled Tony Rivers, gets his revenge on those he hates at high school by turning into a werewolf. Of course, it all ends very badly. Look at that young actor, because that is Michael Landon, who went on to play the rugged father figure in the hugely successful 1970s TV series Little House on the Prairie, which was werewolf-free, by the way. 30 years later, Michael J. Fox went on to play Teen Wolf in a very kind of typical 1980s Reagan-era sunny yuppie comedy all about coming of age. In marked contrast, the 2011 series Teen Wolf, while taking the basic premise of the 1980s version, made it a much darker affair, maybe more in keeping with the mood of our time. Now, men haven't got a monopoly on becoming werewolves. Women have also been accused of becoming werewolves over the century, and with this we have an overlap with witchcraft. In the 1944 movie Cry of the Werewolf, a Roma princess called Celeste is trying to make sure that the secrets of her ancestor, a gypsy queen called Marie Latour, are never revealed. Celeste is capable of turning into a werewolf, which she does, and goes on a rampage to defend her family honour. Other movies with female werewolves include An American Werewolf in Paris in 1997, Blood and Chocolate from 2007, and The Beast Must Die, released in 1973. The Beast Must Die saw actor Michael Gambon transform into a werewolf. You might recognise him because decades later he played Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies. American Werewolf in Paris was actually a sequel to American Werewolf in London. It was released 15 years later, but whereas American Werewolf in London was acclaimed, American Werewolf in Paris was regarded as one of the worst sequels ever. The first ever werewolf movie had a shape-shifting main character who was both female and Native American. That film was called The Werewolf, and it was made in 1913, just before the First World War, about a Navajo woman who believes that her husband has abandoned her, so she trains to be a sorcerer. She shares her magical powers with her daughter Watuma, who can then become a wolf and savages white settlers who are taking over their land. This early movie was sadly destroyed in a studio fire in 1924, so we have no moving images, unfortunately. But it was based on the Native American mythological character of the Skinwalker. And in contrast with werewolves, who are unfortunate, cursed to live with that condition, skinwalkers relish the prospect of becoming a wild animal, especially a wolf. We've seen the werewolf then as a voracious male teenager and a strong-willed female, but how about the werewolf as a career-frustrated white middle-aged man? Dial back to the early 1990s and the end of the Reagan yuppie boom, and Hollywood was channeling the rage of sacked salary workers. Wolf, back in 1994, has actor Jack Nicholson being sacked from his media job, but at the same time he's been bitten by a wolf, and now he's turning lupine. This allows him to bite the finger off a mugger and also take on the evil corporate that has ended his livelihood. So there's plenty of middle-class revenge fantasy going on here. The year before Wolf, we'd had Falling Down with Michael Douglas as an unemployed white-collar man who goes on a criminal rampage. So this was very much a theme of the time. The only difference here is that in order to get his revenge, Jack Nicholson grows claws and fangs. The Nazis undoubtedly had a thing about werewolves. At the end of the Second World War, the Third Reich actually created paramilitary units called werewolves who would not abide by the usual rules of war. This was one last desperate bid by the Nazis to avoid the inevitable defeat. Hitler even called his headquarters on the Eastern Front the Wolf's Lair. So not surprising perhaps that Hollywood has mashed up the Nazis and werewolves. 2017's Werewolves of the Third Reich did exactly that, giving us a storyline where Dr. Mengele, who was a real-life doctor at Auschwitz, conducting appalling so-called experiments, well, in this movie, he crops up trying to create a corps of invincible werewolf soldiers who will win the Second World War for the Third Reich. I'm not going to tell you what I think about that movie. Why don't you download it, watch it, and tell me what you think? And before you forget, hit the subscribe button or I'll send a werewolf round. Going back beyond the Hollywood movies, what 19th century novels inspired the werewolf story? This is something that I'm often asked. Well, I've talked about the fact that many werewolves have been women, and in fact the first werewolf short story in the 19th century was written by a female author, Catherine Crowe. A Story of a Werewolf was published in 1846, but sadly, Catherine Crowe's obsession with the supernatural began to affect her mental health. In 1854, she was found walking naked around the city of Edinburgh, convinced that she was invisible. Even sadder was the lack of empathy and sympathy that she got from one very famous fellow novelist, Charles Dickens. He remarked rather cattily, "Mrs. Crowe has gone stark mad and stark naked." Decades later, the suffragette and Victorian feminist Clemence Houseman had a female werewolf going on a murderous rampage, killing men, in The Werewolf, published in 1896. American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft was a big fan of that book. And then we have a male 19th century author, Captain Frederick Marryat, who has a very scheming and cunning female werewolf in his book, The White Wolf of the Hartz Mountains. In this book, the werewolf, a woman called Christina, tricks her way into a family home and actually marries the father of the children she then murders. She is a woman who changes into a white wolf in order to kill. And we're left in no doubt throughout the book that Christina is very much in charge of events. A female werewolf like this must have been very unsettling and yet kind of thrilling for Victorian readers, a woman who was completely in control of her surroundings. One very famous 19th century novel with a strong wolf theme is The Jungle Book, written by Rudyard Kipling and published in 1894. Everybody knows the Walt Disney animated version, of course, but the Rudyard Kipling book is very different in tone. Mowgli is a lost and abandoned child, but a wise wolf called Akela, who leads a pack of wolves, decides that the boy should be adopted. However, a wicked tiger called Shere Khan wants to annihilate Mowgli, but has to get past Akela first, so Akela must be murdered. This struggle that rages through the book sees Mowgli return to human society where he's pretty much rejected. He then goes back to the wolves and finally returns back to human beings again. Some believe that the inspiration for the Jungle Book was the case of a so-called wolf boy called Dina Sanichar, who was found walking around on all fours with a pack of wolves in the year 1867 in British-controlled India. He was taken to an orphanage where apparently he continued to make wolf howling noises and walked around on all fours pretty much until he died in 1895, a year after the Jungle Book came out. He wasn't by any means the last wolf boy to be found in India. Another feral child emerged in 1954, again believed to have been living with wolves. Now, he died as a young man in 1968 and was subjected to a very detailed autopsy. And in 1976, in the state of Uttar Pradesh in India, a dazed and confused boy was found with 3 young wolf cubs. He had calluses all over his hands and knees and very long nails. He was called the Wolf Boy of Lucknow and was handed over to Mother Teresa of Calcutta and her nuns. He apparently never learned to speak and died in 1985, still a young man. There have been more reports of so-called wolf boys, some of them covered in hair all over their face. This is probably a condition called hypertrichosis, which is sometimes rather cruelly referred to as werewolf syndrome. Or they may have a psychiatric condition where they truly believe that they are a wolf, and this is something that's termed lycanthropy. Alternatively, maybe these boys really have been reared by wolves, like the legendary Romulus and Remus, the founders of ancient Rome, who were said to have been brought up and suckled by a wolf. When we go back in history to a time when people really believed in werewolves, in the existence of these threatening, malevolent creatures, there's one country that comes up again and again, and that's France. In 1598, in the Jura region of France, a girl called Pernette Gandillon was running about on all fours, convinced she was a wolf. One day, as she was running around, she came across 2 children picking strawberries as she was in one of her fits of lycanthropic madness. In what seemed to be a fit of bloodlust, Pernette lunged at a little girl, but her 4-year-old brother tried to defend her. Pernette saw that the 4-year-old boy had a little knife on him. She grabbed it and she slashed his throat. Local villagers ran to the scene, and seeing what Pernette had done, they literally tore her to pieces. But that wasn't enough to calm their rage. They turned on Pernette's father, a man called Pierre, and they accused him of turning his children into wolves using an ointment that he'd been given by the devil. They also said that Pierre turned himself periodically into a hare, but mainly a wolf with long shaggy grey hair. Pierre apparently then turned himself back into a human being by rolling around in dewy grass. Now, Pierre might have been able to brush off this accusation if it wasn't for the fact that his own son Georges then turned on his own father, and accused Pierre of having turned him, yes indeed, into a wolf using that devilish ointment. And in wolf form, his father had then taken him to a witch's sabbath. Well, as if it wasn't bad enough having your own son turn on you, then his daughter turns on him, Antoinette, and she said that she could make hail fall from the skies, that she'd sold herself to the devil, and that she could turn into a he-goat. Not surprisingly, Pierre and his 2 children were then put in jail, but in a curious twist, Pierre and Georges did start running around in the prison cell on all 4s. Apparently they also took to howling like wolves, so this was proof enough of their guilt. Pierre, Georges and Antoinette were then taken from the prison cell, hanged and burned in the public square. Pernette Gandillon is just one of many women, as you can see from this list on the screen now, who were executed or punished for being werewolves. I'm sure there were many, many more. Now, if we go back just over 1,000 years, we come to the fearsome Vikings. And among them, we have Viking warriors who call themselves Berserkers. They wear bear skins, and we also have wolf skins. The wolf skins are sometimes referred to by the word Ulfhednar. Both the Berserkers and the Ulfhednar believed that by wearing these skins, the spirits of the animals would channel into their bodies, that in battle they would become terrifying animals. It was said that these animalistic Vikings had such a lust for warfare that before a battle started they'd bite their own shields, they'd attack trees and boulders and bash their heads against them, and they'd even kill some people on their own side. Some people theorize that these Vikings induced themselves into a kind of psychotic state. Others believe that they were assisted with hallucinogenic drugs like magic mushrooms, for example, to truly believe that they had become bears or wolves. In the Bible, we have one possible example of lycanthropy, and that is the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. This monarch, who conquered Judah and destroyed the Temple of Solomon, possibly taking the Ark of the Covenant, had periodic fits of madness where he believed he was a wild animal. This may have been an example of lycanthropy. Of course, it could also have been Israelite propaganda, but let's take the theory at face value for a moment. In the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, most likely written by Jewish people in captivity in Babylon, it was said that Nebuchadnezzar at times had to live apart from human beings. The book of Daniel says that the king was driven away from people and ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. Very quickly, if you think there's something that I've missed so far, do feel free to comment below and ask me to comment on it. Werewolves have made their way into rock and pop music. Unsurprisingly, perhaps Ozzy Osbourne embraced his inner werewolf in the early 1980s, going totally lupine and crazy in a video for the song Bark at the Moon. In 1978, Warren Zevon had a massive hit with the song Werewolves of London. There we are with London again. This was a plaintive love song about 2 werewolves. In 1982, the American punk band The Dead Kennedys had one of their lesser known songs, Dog Bite, about somebody getting bitten by a dog and turning into a werewolf. The whole werewolf thing is very popular in Iberian culture, and the Spanish pop band La Unión had a hit in the 1980s with El Lobo Hombre en París, the Wolfman in Paris, with a pretty blood-soaked video for the time. And when it was played on dance floors, I remember being in a disco sometime in the 1980s with everybody going "Ooh" at the appropriate moment. You had to be there. Well, if you've got any horror themes that you want to explore, don't hold back. Comment below, contact me in whatever way you want. Hope you enjoyed this little detour into the world of werewolves. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.